So, because I have an hour talk, I get to introduce myself, unlike the 10 talkers. My name is Jim Palmer. I am a Wi-Fi person at Ruckus. I have an official title. Some of you might have seen a sticker. That is not my official title. I don't know what my official title is, and quite honestly, I don't really care. So I say I'm a Wi-Fi person at Ruckus because I have 29 years of radio experience. In a couple months, I'm gonna hit 30 years. I have different FCC commercial radio licenses. I have amateur radio licenses. I'm a Harris EDAX master technician. I'm Motorola ICOM factory trained technician, and I played with some other stuff too. Because at heart, I'm actually a radio person. All of us got into Wi-Fi by accident, most of us. Some people actually woke up one day and said, this is what I really wanna do. I wonder about you, but anyway. I'm a radio person at heart. Radio is what I love, Wi-Fi is what I like, and you people are why I wake up. And so I look at things very differently. And so that's what we're gonna talk about today. And oh, by the way, I'm also CWNE, like that. We'll get to that one at the end. I submitted a topic to get voted on, and I said, many people like to think they have designed Wi-Fi in the worst RF in the world. But I can promise each and every one of you sitting in here today that I, Jim Palmer, have designed Wi-Fi in the worst possible scenario. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement, right? But how do I back that up? Well, we gotta define what is the worst RF in the world. Now, maybe it's me when I was complaining about 80 megahertz channels, because you're fast, but they're not using patch antennas. They had them mounted to a wall, really weird. It was like, there's all these problems. Is that the worst? I don't know. Sean Freeman, 80 megahertz channels, 1 megabits per second, channels 1, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 90% retry rate. Is that the worst? Now, I do gotta own this one because that is channel fly on a Ruckus system, so, oops. Maybe that's the worst one, I don't know. Chris, where are you, Chris? Chris talking about OBSS at SeaTac Airport. Oddly enough, this was the same airport that I was complaining about 2 tweets ago. Why would you be using 80 megahertz wide in an airport? Well, there's a topic for a different day. And poor user experience. Is that the worst? I don't know. Jim tweeted this. He was at a hotel, 11G. How could they do that? How could they possibly do that? Now I asked him if I could use this tweet, and he said, yeah, sure. And I said, well, I'm gonna use it a little different, because if you know me, I'm a little different. And he's like, how could they do this? How could they do an 11G? Because, well, wait a second. Streams 4K video all night without a hiccup. Oops. So maybe he thought it was. He thought it was the worst, 11G. But, and if you look at the date on here, right here, this is August of last year when he was seeing 11G network. So is that the worst? It's not the worst. Maybe it's the worst RF, but it's different because Chris was like, oh, I have poor user experience, but his RF didn't look bad. So what is bad? Maybe it's 2.4 and 40 megahertz channels. Maybe it's an event like DEF CON, where you have lots of APs. Or this one that I pulled at Black Hat from a few years ago when I was down on the expo hall floor with 552 wireless networks that I scanned in a 60-second period using Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. Thanks, Adrian. Maybe this is the worst. I don't know. Maybe it's my house. Is my house the worst RF in the world? I mean, well, not my house. I mean, my house is sitting down here, all by itself, but my neighbors here and here, they're not very happy. Who knows? Maybe, where's Jamie? Maybe, Jamie, it's us. Now, when I did this presentation in Prague, I could say, well, it wasn't the Prague WLPC that made the worst RF in the world. It was the Phoenix people, but now that I'm in Phoenix, I don't know if we have an excuse. Maybe we make bad, or is it the clients that make the bad RF? We talk about this all the time about client requirements. Peter did a presentation last year where he's talking about customer requirements and stuff like that, and they're mostly stupid, but not most. They could be, but maybe it's the clients. Now, Sam's gonna give a presentation, I think, later this week about Slack. Now, I pulled this conversation from the Wi-Fi Pro Slack last July, and now I actually said I'm going to attempt a 55-minute presentation in Prague, now Phoenix, and I'm including this entire conversation. And I'm going to show you what this looks like, because it's 16 pages, and it went on, and on, and on, and it kept going, and then I realized, wait a second, if I'm going to get through my presentation, I have to decrease the font size to get it on the screen. And then I went, well, now I need to go this. And it just kept going and going and going. And so that's a lot of stuff, and I'm not talking bad about Slack. But I do have a point. There is a point here, and I want to pull out a couple of these. And this is Scott Lester, who said this. The IT Rebel, he's not here, it is, unfortunately. He said, we spend too much time focusing on being precise in an imprecise world. And I was like, I like that. Daniel Johnson said, well, we spend too much time trying to find a single answer for all scenarios in a world full of chaos. And then Scott came back and he said, agreed. And I went, somebody on Slack agreed. It's like, whew. I was like, so now you can finish work and quit work and finish off this bottle of bourbon. And then Jason said, I would argue that's the job of an SME. Where are you at, Jason? Here. Okay, we're going to get back to you, Jason. Oh, there you are, you're behind the pillar. Because at this point, I'm not really sure what Jason's arguing for, or if he's just arguing for the sake of argument. So, who knows what the worst for RF in the world is, so my talk is pointless. We can all go home now. My 10 talk, I'm actually 9.5 minutes, so came in at 30 minutes. No. Many people like to think they have designed Wi-Fi in the worst RF in the world. I can promise you I've done it in the worst scenario. I want to change that a little bit, because designing Wi-Fi in a horrible RF environment is a popular topic to argue about. But there are tips and tricks that you can follow to improve your chances of delivering a network that can actually work in environments with really bad RF issues. One of the things to keep in mind is, and I'm going to use this hotel as an example. This hotel does not give a rip about the RF environment for a hotel that's down the street. They don't care what's happening downtown with the Super Bowl experience or what that, no. This hotel, this property cares about the RF in their environment. So we spend a lot of time arguing, oh, I've done it this and I've done it here. When in fact, that's a pointless argument. Because for our customers, the people that pay our bills, that allow us to come and do stuff like this, to give us the financial resources to do it, they do not care about somebody else's RF. They care about their RF. They care about their user experience, their customers, the people that are paying their bills. And so when we argue about this stuff, it's kind of pointless. And so what I'm going to do for the next 45 minutes is we're going to talk about Wi-Fi is challenging, especially designing it. But I've come up with some tricks over my years of banging my head against walls and concrete pillars and stuff like that. So we're going to kind of go over some of these. Now, this is Jim's tips for designing Wi-Fi. The first one actually comes from CWSP, and it's called an Organizational Radio Frequency Standard. Now, before you jump on Twitter and start to lambast me, at least let me get through that section, then you can get on Twitter and lambast me about what I'm going to talk about in that one. The second one comes from our buddy Jake Snyder. He told me, have firmly held beliefs that you are willing to change. I got a funny story about that one. The third one comes from this t-shirt that I found. Accuracy matters to a point. I don't know if you can see that. It says E equals MC squared plus or minus 3 dB. So we're going to talk about that. The fourth one comes from this picture that I found called All Things Are Not Created Equal. Now, first time I did this, I didn't realize Sam was going to be in Prague, and then it's such a great thing I had to keep it anyway. But let me blow this up for you. This is not, in fact, Jack Daniels. Sam was sitting here going like this. This is John's Daphne. Now, this I file under stuff I cannot make up. This is a copycat of that is sold in China. They're not sure if they know it's liquid. They're not sure if it will kill you or not. So I file this under stuff I can't make up, but also all things are not created equal. So Sam, I know you got excited when you saw the bottle, but I hate to, but we'll get there. Now the last one I have is trust yourself. Now there's a lot more than 5. I can't get more than that on the screen because I'll run out of time, and the 5 circles looks really good. And so I was like, we'll just stop at 5. So let's go into the first one, Organizational Radio Frequency Standards. Now, I'm going to read my slide here, so pardon me. I am not a lawyer, and nothing I state here should be construed as legal advice. To learn more about what is legal in your area, please consult with the appropriate legal representation for your area. So that's my disclaimer. I'm going to leave this up for this entire section right here. The other thing I will point out is you don't necessarily have to find the law. You just need to find a lawyer who will argue your point for the law. Yeah, that's fun stuff. But let's get going. My first point is unlicensed does not equal unregulated. Now, this actually comes from a ham radio thing that I learned a long time ago, and it actually applies to Wi-Fi with CSMACA, which is listen before you transmit. So, you know, got a little handheld radio here. Some of you might recognize it, a little two-way radio. And the first thing you're taught when you use one of these things is before you mash this big, black push-to-talk button on the side, listen to make sure that somebody else isn't using the spectrum, isn't using the channel, isn't using the frequency. Listen before you transmit. It's not a regulation, it's not a law, but it's just what you do, because even though it's unlicensed, some of it's unlicensed, it's not necessarily unregulated. What about maximum transmit powers? Unlicensed, but it's still regulated. We don't just get to go run around and do things willy-nilly. If we did, none of this would work. We need to have these types of regulations in here. I mean, why can't I run 30 megahertz wide channels? It's unlicensed. Sure, I might have a little bit of overlap in 2.4, but I could get some really good stuff. I get almost three 30 megahertz wide non-overlapping channels in 2.4, and I can get better experience. Unlicensed does not mean unregulated. Now, there's a reason for this. Because even in the licensed world that I came from, you still have to coordinate stuff. There still has to be some type of mechanism that comes in that says, if I want to put up a licensed transmitter, and I buy that license from the FCC, they will dictate where I can plant my antenna. Where can I put that so that I don't interfere with somebody else? It's all about collision avoidance, right? If you ever heard two audio paths coming over the radio and they heterodyne together on the same frequency, sounds really cool, but you can't understand a word they're saying. So that's what we're trying to avoid. And the reason for this, a lot of times, is because near-field interference is an electromagnetic physics issue. You can argue all you want for, hey, it's unlicensed, I can do whatever I want. Except there's this little thing called physics that actually really determines, what actually happens. As much as the people in charge like to think they do, they really don't. Because if I were to take this handheld radio, which can generate, this is the upgraded version, I can do 7 watts of transmit power at 150 megahertz. Now, if I take this little radio and I put it down here next to my wireless mic that's feeding the audio back to the guys in, it's off. If I were to key that thing up, those guys back there, I warned them I was going to do this not to freak them out, because they know, even though it's two wildly different frequencies, both of them are unlicensed, it's going to jam it. It's not going to allow it to work, and then my audio cuts out, and then they get unpleasant things happen. So we're not allowed to do that because that's not a law. It's not a rule. It's not written in any policy. That's just physics. And you can argue against it all you want. It's never going to change. Intermodulation studies, those are a thing. I don't know if you know what an intermodulation study is, but what they do is they'll take the transmitted signal from one radio and a transmitted signal from another radio, and they'll actually look at them and they say, hey, when these things mix, do they produce a third signal that is somewhere between those two that can be equally as strong, sometimes even stronger than the original two signals? It's called intermodulation. And in the radio world, doing what I did in my own jobs, we worked really, really hard to prevent that, because that third signal was unwanted and it can jam all kinds of stuff and make really ugly things. We don't want that. I mean, we can see this in other places too, building electrical codes. I can stomp my feet up and down all day long and say, I want to build a house in the Alps with a super flat, perfectly flat roof. And no one is ever going to allow me to do that, because the first time you get any snow, the whole thing's going to collapse and kill everybody on the inside. And they go, yeah, you might own that land and that property, but we're never going to let you kill yourself because that's just bad for PR. And so we're not gonna let you do that. So these are things that are already in our lives. They already exist. When we bring it back closer to home, we can talk about organizational policies. When you sign on to a new company and they give you that little form to sign, well, they send you those 50 pages that you're supposed to read in 3 minutes, and then you sign your life away at the bottom. You agree to things that you may not realize. Some organizations will tell you you cannot have a personal phone. You come to work, you don't get to carry your phone with you. Now, I'm not saying it's everywhere, but there are places where you agree when you show up in the front door, you drop your phone in a bin, and then you go back to work for the day, and then when you're done, or if you've ever surveyed a place like this, you probably know what I'm talking about. When you're done, you get out, you get to pick up your personal stuff, and then you get to leave. These are things that we agree to do. You know, and then they say, oh, you can't install your own APs. Rogue APs or unlicensed neighbors. There are policies that say you're not allowed to do this. Now, there's a whole bunch of stories about that I'm not going to get into, but there are places where you agree to do this. There are cybersecurity policies. You know, when you sign, you agree to not surf porn at work. You agree to not try to hack the government from your work computer. There's some certain things that you just agree to do as part of the thing. So because these are all regulations that we all agree to follow. And this is where CWSP ties in, because one of the first things I learned when I took CWSP was, hey, you gotta have policies. So if we have policies for stuff like cybersecurity, what you're allowed to carry, what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to build, we have all these other type of regulations and laws of the physics that we live under. What I'm suggesting is, why can't we have an organizational RF standard that we design and implement and say, hey, when you come, especially in MDU and mixed use facilities, build a policy that says, hey, you know, even though the FCC says you're allowed to put up your own AP, I can override that policy. But in order to make this work, we have to understand the use cases of why would a tenant in our building decide he wanted to put up his own AP. I'm gonna go back to Jim and his 11G network in his hotel. It's 11G, and you would immediately look at that and go, that's not gonna work for me. And yet for Jim, he's able to stream 4K videos all night long. For his use case, the 11G worked. Now for Chris, when he was like, OBSS, I had bad user experience. That's why Chris would stand up his MiFi hotspot and destroy the RF and make it even more worse and make people like me when I was in my last job go crazy. It's because you don't understand the use cases. Talk about channel widths. I tell a story about one of our tenants in my last place. It was a retail outlet, and they needed to stream one video from YouTube on a screen the entire time they were open, and they demanded an 80 megahertz wide channel that they could plug their own AP into so that they could get this one video from YouTube. Now, when I tried to tell them that, well, you know, that AP is plugged into a wall jack that is supported by my group, and we actually have a rate limiter on that wall jack that says you get 10 megabits per second. And they went, no, we got to have 80 megahertz wide channels. But I couldn't do anything about it because, well, our organizational RF standards didn't dictate that you cannot put in an AP at 80 megahertz wide. And so because the afternoon manager's son knew a lot about IT, I had an 80 megahertz wide AP running in my airport that I couldn't do anything about. Some devices don't even support, they may only support ISM. They might not support Uni 2, clients.mikealbano.com. That came about because we needed to understand these use cases so that we could build a service that they would want to use. Because if we build one that they want to use, or that works for them, in Jim's case, hey, I get to stream 4K video all night long. He doesn't really care. Well, no, Jim might care, but they don't really care. Is it a 40 megahertz wide channel? Is it an 80 megahertz wide channel? Is there OBSS? Is there CCI? Is there ACI? All they know is, do I get to get my videos on my phone, on my tablet? Do I get to use it the way I want to use it? Because if they do, they never think about, I need to stand up my own service. I don't need to do all this stuff. So if we can build stuff that they want to use, it allows us to better enforce policies in order to keep our RF clean, so we're never having this conversation about, this one time I was designing Wi-Fi in the worst RF in the world. Why are we having these conversations? So I'm trying to prevent that. And the last thing I want to close this topic on is I was having this conversation last year, and somebody said to me, it's fun to talk tough, but it's more effective to just talk and agree to coexist. Because that's really what we're trying to do. We're just trying to coexist. Now, this actually came from my good buddy, John. Hi, John. Thank you for giving me this great talk. There's a great bullet point. Because, yeah, it's fun to walk around and say, I'm going to take my cutters and I'm going to cut that coax cable, or I'm going to yank that Cat 6 cable out of the wall. I'm going to shut you down. It's fun to talk like that, but at the end of the day, all it is usually just a lot of hot air. It's fun to talk tough. It's fun to talk about that stuff. I'm going to jam you with my air horn. But it's more effective to just talk and agree to coexist. And we can do all that stuff if we have an organizational RF standard that allows us to have these, that sets the framework and the ground rules for these conversations to make sure that everybody gets what they want, which is the videos on their phones. Have firmly held beliefs that you are willing to change. Now, the funny story behind this is Jake and I get into some animated conversations every once in a while, and I firmly believe that he said this statement. When I asked Jake about it, Jake said, I've never said that in my life. And neither one of us are willing to change from our firmly held belief about this statement. So, but because we all have beliefs. We all have these beliefs. But beliefs can change over time. I've had many beliefs that have changed over time. In fact, Jake and I were having this conversation like 2 minutes before Keith came up. And the first one was actually about band-specific SSIDs. Jake and I, when we first had this conversation, we spent 18 months going back and forth about band-specific SSIDs. I used to think that, you didn't need them. Or did I think that I did need them? I don't remember. Because like we were talking about, we keep changing our minds on this one. We'll start over here and we're like, you gotta have them. This is the only way you're gonna get it. And then all of a sudden you go, no. Maybe we don't need them. And then after a while you go, oh, no, we're gonna change our mind over here. I firmly believe we have to have band specific. Other things, MAB is an effective security option. I used to think this was a really good thing. I don't anymore. So this is a belief that has changed over time. I used to believe you didn't need to mess with the minimum basic rates. I'd be like, no need to mess with those. If the minimum basic rate is 1, let it be 1. No need to change that. I don't believe that anymore. I have very different, wildly different opinions on that one. I also used to think I needed to adjust every nerd knob that was available on the controller. Now those two have switched. And now I'm like, the only thing I really mess with is the MBR, and I don't really touch any of the other nerd knobs because as I've learned over my years, Wi-Fi, in the most cases, does not work because of us. It works in spite of us. So this is a belief that has changed over time. And why has it changed? Well, because Wi-Fi is part science. It's part art. And if you come to my deep dive, we're going to talk about some art part of this. But Wi-Fi is part science. We're going to talk about a science part because we come up with a hypothesis. And we say, this is what I believe. Here's my hypothesis. Now, like any good scientist, what we do is then we design a test to run it, and we come up with all these things. And we have our test labs and our test networks and everything, and we run it. God, no, what am I talking about? We just then put that straight into production because, like they say, everybody has a test network. Every once in a while, it's different than your production network. So we put that thing right in production. And sometimes it works. Yay, my hypothesis worked. But if you've been doing this more than a day or two, you actually realize that sometimes it doesn't. And now, what ends up happening then is you go, okay, my experiment didn't work, my test didn't work. I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it back into my hypothesis. I'm going to redesign my experiment, my test lab. I'm going to run it through my test lab. No, we just put that thing right back into production. And sometimes it works. And sometimes it doesn't. And then we just keep repeating this process, right? And that's how we learn. That's the science part. And that's where we get to where we know what we know. And this is one of my pieces of advice. Know what you know. Because you've ridden the dumpster fire down the flooded street. Thank you, Marcus, for that clip. I love that clip. Marcus had a presentation a couple years ago and he used it and I was like, that's amazing. So thank you for that, because that's how we learn. We ride the dumpster fire down the flooded street and you go, wow. But keep in mind, you also need to know what you don't know. Now, I put it up there this way because it fits on the slide, you know, it looks all nice, know what you know what you don't know. But actually I'd like to say, understand that you don't know everything, because while you've ridden a dumpster fire down the flaming dumpster fire down the flooded street, you haven't rid my flaming dumpster fire, just like I haven't ridden your flaming dumpster fire. Sometimes it might be similar, but for the most part, it's never exactly the same. So understand that you don't know everything. And this brings me to Daniel. We spend so much time trying to find a single answer for all scenarios in a world full of chaos. And we're never going to get there. We're always going to have the flaming dumpster fire. And then when we get to the end, we do the little dance, we drink our bourbon, and we go to sleep and wake up and do it all over again. So, have firmly held beliefs, but are willing to change them. Accuracy matters to a point. Plus or minus 3 dB is actually a radio thing. It's like a two-way radio way back in the day, Marconi type of thing. And every time I talk to the really, really smart people that I worked with in radio, they'd always tell me, hey, if you can get me within plus or minus 3 dB, I'll be happy. Because it'd be like, what are you looking for? And it'd be like, this is what I'm looking for, plus or minus 3 dB. Because they know that there's some variability within the radio. Because RF is never 100% stable. Sometimes the tools we use fool us into thinking that, you know, oh, here's my signal. There's my flat line. I look over, that's a neg 70 or that's a neg 55. And when you look on the little bar, you know, chart on the side, you go, that's stable, right there. But RF isn't 100% stable. It never is. Because fluctuations happen all the time. Whether we know it or not, whether we see it or not, it really depends on the tools we use to see this RF. This is a picture from a spectrum analyzer, an Agilent spectrum analyzer. And what we're looking at here is it starts at 2.4 gigahertz, and it goes to 2.7 gigahertz, and this right here is the noise floor. Now what you might notice in this little thing is it's not perfectly flat. There's a bunch of fluctuations. Now, for people who can't see or have never really read this, each one of those little columns is 30 megahertz worth of spectrum. So when we take a look down here at this one square right here, you can see in a live trace, we have ups, we have downs, we have peaks. The thing bounces all over the place. Now, for the most part, we can't really deal with that. We can't work with it. It doesn't help us. So what we do is when we go into these spectrum analyzers, we'll turn on what's called an average. So what'll happen is over time, all those little peaks and valleys going up and down like this, they'll turn into that solid line. So then at that point, we can look at it and go, the noise floor is about neg 87.57. That's where my noise floor is. And sometimes we forget that that's an average. We use it as a number because we can't say when we're doing our calculations and everything like, oh, it's fluctuating all the time, so we're gonna do it. No, we just say it's 84. And then we'll go, well, that's kind of hard, so let's round it. We're gonna say it's a neg 85. But we still have those fluctuations in there. The other thing we have on the other side of it, of our signal to noise ratio, for those of you who took some of those boot camps, we have signal fluctuations. So again, Adrian, thank you. This is a couple of screenshots from Wi-Fi signal as I was sitting in my house, and I was sitting at my desk. My laptop was in the dock. My AP was mounted to the wall on the other side of my office, and nobody was moving. It was really, and I was just like, I was sitting there watching it. And what I noticed over a span of about 5 to 8 seconds, as fast as I could take these screenshots, my signal would change. We started with a neg 51, then I went to a neg 48, and then I went to a neg 46. Now the noise floor doesn't change for a lot of other reasons that I don't have time to get into, but that signal level, as I was sitting there in my office, nobody moving, early morning, no traffic, nothing happening, I bounced between a neg 46 and a neg 51. That's 5 dB. How can I account for that when I'm trying to design? Well, I can't. Now, how I can account for it is I say, hey, I'm looking for a neg, we'll call it a neg 48, plus or minus 3 dB. So now all of a sudden, it works. From a radio person's perspective, this works. This makes sense because I'm looking for a neg 48. Plus 3 dB, oh, neg 46. Minus 3 dB, neg 51. Now it all works because the fluctuations happen, and they happen all the time. Now, sometimes I think we lose perspective in dB math. So ECSE, design, CWMA boot campers, talked about DB math, everybody? Nobody? I thought we had that. Yeah, okay. All right, so you guys are with me on this one, right? You're gonna back me up, because you just went through it and all the rest of us haven't done it in years, so we forget. When we talk about a plus 20 dBm, plus or minus 3 dB, it's 17 to 23 dBm. Now that seems like a really big swing, and it is. You're talking about anywhere from 50 to 200 milliwatts of transmit power, and I'm sitting here telling you, yeah, that's an okay spread. That's cool. You can bounce anywhere within that, I don't really care. Well, you forget that that number is at the AP, way up here. Now for the design people, that's what we design for, right? We design way up. No? What type of instructors did you get? No. Oh, sorry, Francois, I forgot you were here. Not bad. No, we design down here. So don't lose perspective of the fact when I say this, we're setting levels here, but we're actually designing for down here where our laptops, where our phones are sitting. It's all sitting here, that's where we design for. So instead of looking at it from the AP perspective, let's take a look at it from the client perspective. Now I picked neg 67 because math is hard and I'm lazy. And so the numbers work best on the next bullet point if I start with a neg 67. So if we take that same thing, we compare it, it's neg 64, neg 70, cool. But when we take that and then we convert it, instead of 500 or 50 to 200 milliwatts, up here what we're talking about is anywhere from 100 to 400 picowatts down here. But we're really kind of, looking for about 200 picowatts. Now picowatts is a very small number. I mean, we're talking about in a billionths of a watt. And so when we go back and we take a look at it from our noise floor fluctuations again, from this screen right here, and we're talking about these signals down here, these very low level signals, we're looking at it, the marker right here. That's what a marker is. If you've never used a spectrum analyzer, the markers are your friend. They're your best friend in a spectrum analyzer. So we take a look at it and we say, that little point right here, that diamond right there, we can say that that is 2.5 gigahertz and it's a neg 84.57 at that exact point. However, when you take a look at the other parts of this, and we take a look at these low valleys down here, and we take a look at these high peaks up here, that's anywhere between there. That's just a natural thing that's happening in the environment. That's plus or minus 3 dB from where we think our average is. So that's why we say in the RF world, plus or minus 3 dB, because we know all these fluctuations happen and you can't plan for them, you can't account for them. So if you can get me within plus or minus 3 dB, I'll be happy. Never underestimate installers. Because accuracy matters to a point. Because if you can imagine how an installer will screw it up, they will. They will screw up things in ways you've never, ever imagined. So accuracy matters to a point. If you try to be really specific with an installer and you say, I want it here, and I want this, and you list all these bullet points of how you want your stuff installed, it's never gonna happen. So you gotta be accurate to a point, and if you make it such a minute point, your installers will dream up of ways to screw your design. It's happened. Because with especially unexperienced installers, accuracy matters to a point. There's sometimes when I'm like, look, if you can just get the API handed you in the right room, we're just gonna call that one a win and move on with our lives. Because if you try to say, I want it exactly right here, and they show up and somebody came in one day and said, hey, you know what, we should put this big metal beam, and you said, I want it just 6 inches on that side of that pot light right there, and you're gonna be like, ooh, it doesn't work there. So if you do that, you can really end up screwing yourself in ways you've never imagined. Now, on the other side of that, don't dismiss experienced installers. An experienced installer will save your bacon every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Because a good installer knows that accuracy matters to a point. They know and understand that, hey, look, he's trying to get the AP in this room, but he's really kind of trying to get it in this section of the room right here. If I can get it in the back half, that's good. And so when they come in and they go, hey, he said he wanted it here, but it turns out they put a big giant chandelier. So instead of saying, we're gonna put it right next to the chandelier, let's move it over here. And they make that call and that adjustment on the fly. And they don't call you, they don't bother you. Because that way, when they do call and bother you, and they go, look, we got a problem, we need you down here. You know, hey, I gotta move, because if that guy's having a problem, there's a bigger problem. And most of the time you walk in and you go, yeah, that's a good one right there. Let me think about this and I'll get back to you. And they can really help you out. Because there's a thing, I'm ex-military, a lot of you are probably ex-military. There's a thing called Murphy's Law of Combat. Now, Murphy's Law of Combat states that any good battle plan does not survive first contact with the enemy. My Murphy's Law of design is no good Wi-Fi design ever survives first contact with the installers. So accuracy matters to a point. And here's Scott Lester's point. We spend too much time focusing on being precise in an imprecise world. So if you do that, you're going to run into problems. All things are not created equal. The first one that is not created equal are line graphs and presentations. So, since 2019, I now have 3 gratuitous line graphs in my presentation, why Eddie Ferrero only has 1, and Jake Snyder still has 0 gratuitous line graphs in his WLCP. So when you're voting, this is the slide you think about when you're voting. You go, who's going to give me a gratuitous line graph? Was that 4? Or how many people laughed? 3.5. Oh, 3. No, my over-under was 4. 3.5. Oh, 3.5's under. So if you voted under, then you win that one. Internal antenna AP patterns are not the same. Doesn't mean I'm not vendor bashing here. I'm just simply pointing out the fact that due to many, many, many different considerations, they're just not the same. One's not better, one's not worse. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they're not the same. And that comes because of how they're built. Now, this is a random enterprise AP that I found online. And let me tiptoe through this one. There are 4 dual band antennas right here. Looks kind of cool there in the corners. They also have 4 5 gigahertz antennas spaced right around there in the middle. It's kind of cool, nice symmetrical, makes my circles look really cool. I also have an IoT radio that's sitting way over here on the side. And then smack dab right in the middle, we have a receive antenna. And all of those things, as much as we like to think they don't interact with each other, they do. And the result is this type of pattern. I don't know about you, but I hate looking at patterns for an AP that's designed to mount on the ceiling, and they put it like it's sitting on a table, because I can't picture that. So let me spin this for you. Now I can understand it. So what you'll see is you end up with this nice pattern. Now this is called a semi-hemispherical, because what you see is the top side of that, above where it's mounted up here, there's not a signal. The signal's down here where we want it, right? Now if I spin this thing, you can really kind of see that that red line is kind of wonky as it goes around like this. It is what it is. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just what it is. Now you take a look at, a Ruckus AP, which I happen to have I get my hands on, which is why I use it. What you'll see is it's a little different. We have arrays, 4 of the 5 gigahertz. We have some 2.4 arrays, bam, right there. Then we also have some just antenna elements. An array is multiple elements, an element is just a single one. And then we have 3 dual band antennas. Now these are not spaced on the board the same as a previous AP. And when we take a look at the way that we compare it to our enterprise AP here, I'm gonna push that off to the side, and we're gonna bring up this one, and it's actually, you won't find this on a slick on our website. I got this from engineering. Take a look at it, it looks a little different. Well, okay, now I can talk to it. So what happens is when you take a look at this, you can see that the patterns are very different. And that's just a physics thing. Now, to help you understand this and give you some perspective, I highlighted the 20 dB downline. Now this is just a random figure that I pulled, because what we can see is on this side, the signal level is at minus 15, at the lowest point on the back side, for all those clients that we're serving above the drop ceiling. Now, on the peaks on the side of those things, it's 10 dB hotter than the minus 20. When we take a look at the one on the right, what we see is it's really kind of focused, but it's not focused in the same way. The center part is pulled up. Now, when you manipulate RF, what happens is you don't really get rid of it. There's always artifacts. So as you pull that thing up, what happens is it pushes out on the side, and there's not as much on the back side. So it changes the way that the RF propagates off of that thing. It's just a physics issue. Is one better than the other? No. Oh, hold on a second, let me cover that emblem right there. No, it's just different. What works for your scenario? We always say design to the requirements. What's your requirements? I don't know, I'm not doing the design, you are. You pick that. And it's not just internal antenna APs, external antennas are also not created equal. Here's one that was not created equal in somebody's backyard. The backyard is where these things were created. They were deployed at an airport. But yeah, did they work? Sure. How well did they work? No idea. We never put them in a chamber, but they did work, right? We take a look at some more modern ones. You see a patch antenna, that's a printed circuit board antenna. And then we see this antenna on the right, which is just metal element antenna. Is one better than the other? I don't know. Yes, no, maybe. It depends. Scott left, so I don't have to pay him my $1 for using that. But when we take a look at the patterns, that's where we really care about. Now, Keith loves my pattern chart, so we're gonna have fun right now. When we take a look at this external antenna pattern, what we see is a horizontal and a vertical plane. And you can see it's really pushing everything one way, because this is a patch antenna. This is saying I want all my energy right here, and the horizontal and the vertical, different, we get that, right? Now when we take a look at this pattern right here, this is wild. I see it's wildly different. You might see it something different, but it is different. Now, when you take a look at it, this is actually a semi-hemispherical antenna. They're both external antennas. They're both the things that, I like to use, I love to use, but the patterns are wildly different. Which one works for your use case? I don't know, you pick that. Now, you can really tell the difference when you look at the horizontal pattern, because the patch is really simple to see. We rotate it, put it there, that patch is going down. But if you notice the horizontal pattern on the one on the right, even though it rotated, did it change much? No. Because the one on the left is a patch. The one on the right, it's either an omni or a semi-hemispherical antenna pattern. From a horizontal pattern, we can't tell. We have to take a look at the vertical ones. Now all of a sudden, God, rotate. Now all of a sudden you can say, hey, these vertical patterns are definitely different. They're both pushing down, but they have different artifacts in them. One's very tight, and so that's a patch antenna. The one on the right, a semi-hemispherical antenna, actually has that null right in the middle, and most of them do. So I always laugh when people are like, I was standing right underneath the AP, and I'm like, yeah, there's a null right there. Yeah, you don't want to be right underneath the AP, you actually want to be right a couple feet over, and then you're in the main lobe. Which one works for you? I don't know, you pick, but there's differences. So not everything's created equal. Now in the 9 minutes that I have left, I'm going to talk to my 30-minute slide here. There's a concept I talk a lot about called antenna roll-off. I'm going to take the time here to explain it because I think it's really important. These are two different patterns from two different manufacturers from roughly the same type of antenna. One of them has both the horizontal and the vertical, the other one's just the vertical. So what we're talking about is actually the inside one, this red one, I'll highlight it. Here, let's switch to here. So we're going to talk about this trace here on this one. We're going to compare it to the one on the right. Now there's 3 dB down, that's how we measure our antennas. 3 dB down, what's my beam width? How wide is it? Boop. So what we do is we say, hey, it crosses the 3 dB down line on the one on here, it's 30 degrees on the left, 25 degrees on the right. So we say it's a 55 degree antenna, which matches the spec on the bottom. Take a look at this one, and we go, that's supposed to be 60 degrees. Well, is it? Well, yeah, it is 60 degrees to the right. I guess they forgot about the 70 degrees to the left. But it's spec'd this way. Now, maybe you want that. Maybe you don't. But for me, I don't really care about the 3 dB downline. Because when we design to, say, a neg 65, we want that neg 65 on the 3 dB down. We say, this is the area we want to cover. We want neg 65 to neg 65. It's going to be stronger in the middle. We don't care. We're doing the neg 65. Well, the problem is 3 dB down from that is neg 68, which would be a 6 dB down. Now, neg 68, well, not awesome. It's not bad. Neg 68 is a good RF signal. Your client's going to look at that and go, I'm good with the neg 68. I'm going to stay here. So what I look for is I want to see where do we get down to 10 dB down. And more importantly, I want to know how fast we get there. So we take a look on the left, we get from the green 30 degrees, and then we go down to the red line where it crosses there. It's an additional 25 degrees on the left, 20 degrees on the right. Take a look at this one. Wow. It's 30 additional degrees on the left and 40 additional degrees on the right. So when we take a look at what we're really looking at from our patterns, the one on the left at 10 dB down is actually 100 degrees, not 55. The one on the right is 190 degrees. Maybe you want that. Maybe you don't. You could want it, Steve. It's up to you to make that decision. You just need to know the information. Coax cable. Not the same across the board, same thing. Take a look at my patch antennas here, and what you'll see is the one on the left and the one on the right, they have different coax. And that's fine. It's a choice, because the designers know that there's such a thing as coax cable loss. Just like free space path loss, we have loss in coax cables. Now, depending on the type of coax cable you have, the loss changes based on my little chart here. Now, that blue line at the top is LMR 100. For everybody on the sides, there's a little LMR 100. It's a nice flexible cable, does all kinds of stuff. The one on the bottom is a different cable called LDF4. It's a little different. I don't know, because I'm breaking the law in front of the tape. These are massively different. Now, at lower frequencies, it's not as big a difference. LMR 100 sucks. But it's really good if you have very short lengths, because this is at 100 feet. So if you're only running this thing 18 inches, which is what this is, right? The loss isn't going to be at, we'll say the top end of 6 gigahertz here, almost close to 7 gigahertz. At 100 feet, the loss here is 71 dB. The loss here is 6 dB. So if you're running 100 feet and you're going to support the top end of the 6 gigahertz spectrum, use this cable. Don't use this cable. The problem is there's a lot of other situations and variables we got to take into account for that. But however, at shorter distances, like this is 18 inches, 1.5 feet right here. There's 1 dB of loss. However, I also have to account for the connectors. The connectors also add loss. So I'm losing power right here. Is that acceptable? For an antenna manufacturer, they might go, yes. 1 dB is not bad because we're plus or minus. However, well, if I had 1.5 feet of this stuff, which is very impractical and I'd never suggest you use it, this is only 0.1 dB of loss. So this is very efficient. But you have to understand that these things exist. So when you make your design decisions, especially people doing outdoor Wi-Fi or the mines, and you're doing all this kind of crazy stuff, everybody goes, wow, he's doing the crazy stuff. If you understand this, you can then make design decisions. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying they're different. And understanding those differences allow you to work in these tough environments. And this brings us to our very last point. We can now quit early and finish off the bottle of bourbon that we had to open half an hour ago when I first started talking. And this is where I bring Jason back in. Where are you at, Jason? You're behind the pole. He left? Yeah. Did he take the bourbon with him? See, yeah, because I'm going to say that that's what Jason was really arguing about, is we need to drink bourbon at 9 a.m. So when you're doing that and your boss says, what are you doing? You go, it's Jason's fault. He said I could. So this brings me to my last point. Trust yourself. Because at the end of the day, you don't know what I know. I don't know what you know. First timers are sitting here going, well, there's CWNEs, there's CCIEs, there's instructors, there's all these other things. But you actually know a lot more than everybody else when you look at the general population of the world. So trust yourself, because we are not everyone in this room has a PhD in physics, and that's fine. Because quite frankly, that'd be really boring. You don't make as much money as you do if you're doing us. Expert is a loaded word. I was talking at dinner the other night and I said, I hate the word expert because I subscribe to the idea of the martial arts with black belts. In martial arts and black belts, they say, when you get your black belt, it's not the end of the road. It's actually the beginning of the road. You now have enough tools. You now have enough experience. You have enough knowledge that you can then start your journey. So when I see it and I go, I'm a CWNE, all that means to me is when I take Peter McKenzie's CWAP class and I ask a question, I actually don't feel like an idiot asking the question because I'm like, I believe this is a good question. This is a valid question because I don't know as much as Peter. God, no, does anybody? Yeah, no, nobody does. Yeah, okay, Peter knows as much as Peter. So Peter, one hand in the far corner. It's in a loaded word, right? But don't feel bad if you're not. Because here's the thing, Peter has untold number of dumpster fires that he has ridden down the street. Unbelievably untold. But it's not your dumpster fire. You've ridden your own dumpster fires. You're here for a reason. Is because you've ridden the dumpster fire and you're like, man, I got to get better so I'm not riding that dumpster fire as often. Because you are going to make mistakes, even to this day. And you're going to make mistakes over the rest of your career. It's going to happen. How many times have you look back on a design and you go, that you did 5 years ago or 8 or a year ago and you go, oh my God, they paid me for that. You're like, maybe I should give them a refund. No, you don't think that, but you're going to make mistakes. But you're going to get better. I promise you, because that's how we learn. You make the mistakes. You ride the dumpster fires. You are going to get better. So trust yourself. Have a little bit of self-confidence. Don't be afraid when you're talking to me or anybody else and go, you know what? I had this experience and I learned something and I feel like it's valued to you. That's why you're up here. Because many people like to think they have designed Wi-Fi in the worst RF in the world. But I can promise you I have done it in the worst possible scenario ever. Because we all have. All of us together. So thank you.